Welcome to What the Folk. This week I'm reading The Knight of the Lion by Chretien De Troyes. This is an abridged version of the tale, though the tale does work well for abridging. It contains lots of modular internal stories that can be included and removed, though the ones in this version are quite fun. The version I'm reading today comes from Romance and a Legend of Chivalry by A.R. Hope Moncrief. It's a nice little collection of chivalric tales I bought. So let's begin. The Knight of the Lion, Chapter 1. The brave Sir Yvain had wed a fair lady, the mistress of goodly castles and wide lands. To the marriage came Arthur and his knights of the Round Table, and from far and near people flocked to look upon their great king. So for a week all was feasting and jollity in the lady's castle, where the time was spent in sports and hunting and banquets, such as beseemed these noble guests. But when a week had passed, the king must ride forth against the heathen who were laying waste a distant part of his realm. Then, as all the castle rang with the clamour of armour and the trampling of steeds, Sir Yvain drew his new-made wife aside and took her by the hand and spoke gently thus. "Sweet lady, there is a thing I would pray thee, for my honour and thine." "Truly, sir." "Fear not, but I will do all you wish," said the lady, smiling. Yet her countenance changed when she heard that she must let her husband follow the king. "Well, thou knowest how loth I am to part from thee, but think how men will blame me if I leave all my knighthood and dwell idly at home. Nay, what good wife would love her lord better if he cared only to lie in her arms? Give me leave, then, to ride forth for 12 months, and win worship in deeds of arms." "Sad should I be to grieve thee," she cried. She was sore unwilling to let him go. "I give thee my leave, but, Sir Yvain, promise, by the love thou owest me, to come back ere a year be gone. This is the eve of St. John. Look that thou comest by this day 12-month, else shalt thou lose my love for ever." "Lady," said he, kissing her, "if I might have my will, I would never leave thee, but now naught shall hinder me from keeping the day thou hast set. Fear not for my life. The love of thee will be a charm to strengthen thy true knight against every foe." Gladly then Sir Yvain let his squire do on his armour, dinted in many a fray. Lightly he leapt upon his horse among the band of goodly knights, while his lady held the king's stirrup and bade him good speed. But the tears trickled down her cheek, and when her husband lingered behind to give her one more kiss, she whispered in his ear, beseeching him again not to fail to keep his day. Chapter 2. Far rode King Arthur and his knights. Fiercely warred they with the heathen foe. Sir Yvain, as of old, was first in every fight, yet escaped from all unhurt. When the war was over, he did not go homewards, for the love of knighthood was strong on him, and too lightly he forgot the love of his lady. But he rode with his brothers in arms to jousts and tournaments, held here and there in the honour of Arthur's knights. Wherever doughty deeds were done, Sir Yvain still bore himself among the best, and won prizes in all the lists, so that his fame went forth all over the land. Thus the 12-month passed away, and so greedy of renown was the knight that still he stayed from his lady, and minded not the pledge he had given her. But one day, as he feasted at the king's table, and the queen spoke to him of his newly wedded wife, he suddenly bethought him of her last words, and how he had promised to be with her by a day now some time past. Sorrowful and ashamed he rose from the table, and would have saddled his horse to ride home that hour, so that even yet he might mend his fault. But before he could take leave of the king and queen, there came hastily into the hall a damsel who knelt before Arthur and said, "Sir King, heaven save thee! My lady greets thee by me, and the good Sir Lancelot, the courteous Sir Gawain, and all thy knights save one. Sir Yvain has deceived my lady, and it were shamed to call so false a man a knight. She weened she had his heart, and truly he made great boast of his love. But all was treason and treachery, for now he has broken the term that was set between them, and thought nothing of her grief. He cannot become of noble blood, so soon he forgets his wife, who loved him better than herself. Therefore, unkind and untrue man, she will see thee no more. Deliver me my lady's ring. With this she stepped up to Sir Yvain, and, as he stood astonished, tore from his hand the ring his wife had given him, hurried from the hall, leapt upon her palfrey, and went her way without another word. Neither squire nor groom rode with her, and no man knew where she had gone. Sir Yvain stood still, as overwhelmed by the news of the lady's anger, then rushed after the damsel, and would have followed her on foot, but nowhere could he see her, for she had ridden into a great forest. Yet he ceased not to seek her, wandering through the forest, wild with grief, crying out angrily against his own folly and forgetfulness. Alas, for the day I was born! Have I thus lost my love? Would then that I might die, he cried loud and often, and in his despair tore up the trees and broke his sword against the rocks, till, breathless and exhausted, he fell upon the grass. He rose again, and again fury took him, and now he threw away his armour, helmet and shield, and mail of proof, rent his vest and shirt to shreds, flung them to the winds, running naked like a wild beast through the deepest thickets. His men sought him far and near, but found only his armour, which they brought back to the king, and took their master for dead. The news went abroad, and all men mourned for the brave Sir Yvain, his lady most of all, for she repented of her anger when she knew that he had lost his wits from sorrow and love of her. But Yvain was alive in the woods, sleeping on the bare ground, and living on roots and berries. His madness waxed greater from day to day. Once he came upon a savage hunting in the woods. He wrestled his bow and arrows from him, and was gone before the savage could raise his club. Henceforth he could kill wild beasts, and have raw flesh for his daily food, and drink warm blood. Still he fled the sight of all men. His hair and nails grew. He was frightful to behold, as he roamed around, murmuring to himself the name of his wife, and from time to time taken by a fit of fury, in which he would tear all around him or try to dash himself to pieces upon the rocks. To such a plight had this good knight come, who stood once in so great honour and renown. Save himself, the only dweller in this forest was a hermit, who had built a little cell in the midst of a bushy glade. When the hermit saw a naked man armed with bow and arrows, he fled hastily out of his way. But soon he knew Yvain was a madman, and took pity on him, and set barley bread and water out at the window of his hermitage for him. Yvain's wits were not so far gone, but that he knew the hermit meant kindly by him, and every day he would steal up to take the food thus provided, though he never saw or spoke with the holy man. Every day, too, he would leave in return at the door of the cell the carcass of a deer or some other beast, which he had killed, and when he was gone, the hermit would bring it in and cook the venison, and set out part of that also for the hunter. Thus both of them fared better for their friendship, yet neither of them knew so much as the other's name. But by Yvain's looks and bearings, and by the scars of his wounds, the hermit believed him to be a gentle knight, for whom some great sorrow had taken away his wits. Then he carried the skins of the slain beasts to the nearest town and sold them, and with the money bought clothes and arms, such as beseemed a knight, and medicines, for this hermit was skilled in healing, and hoping yet to cure the wild man of his madness. So a year went by, while Yvain still dwelt in the forest, and, but for the old man's kindness, would have led the life of the beasts. He began to bethink himself who he was, and to remember what had gone before. Then he lay for hours on the ground, sighing and weeping. His sorrow became so great that he cared not to eat, and could no longer hunt for food. His strength left him. Often he swooned away. He desired nothing but to die. The hermit always left out bread and water for him, but the poor man seldom came for them now. At last, when 7 days had passed, and the food was untouched, the hermit, fearing he must be dead, set out one morning through the forest in search of him. Before long he came upon Yvain lying under a tree, all pale and worn and senseless. His heart still beat, and the good old man made haste to help him. He ran to his hermitage and quickly brought the clothes and arms which he had provided. These he laid by the side of the sleeping knight, then anointed his body above the heart with a precious ointment of which the virtues were known to him alone. This done, he stole away and left Yvain still sleeping. When the sun came to noon, and its beams fell on his face, he awoke and rose and was astonished, for lo, his sickness and madness had left him, and he stood up a whole man in mind and body, though how he came by this cure he knew not. And there lay at his side clothes and armour and a good sword, such as he had cast away from him in his frenzy a year ago. That year now seemed nothing but a frightful dream, and yet, as Yvain beheld himself in a clear fountain hard by, he knew that he had indeed been living like a savage man, and feared all would fly from the sight of him. He bathed himself in the fountain, and though at first too weak to stand upright, he was soon able to put on his clothes and armour, and found he could still draw a sword. Then he knelt and thanked heaven for this deliverance, vowing never to use his sword save to succour the helpless and the oppressed. Chapter 3. Slowly he now took his way through the forest, stiff of limb and heavy of heart, and though his madness had passed away, thought ever with a sorrow on the lady whose love he had lost. Thus many an hour and many a mile he wandered, but met no living thing. But towards evening he heard a dreadful noise in a thicket close at hand, and when he hastened thither by the nearest way, he saw a fearsome sight. A lion and a dragon were struggling together with all the fury of their kind, the dragon breathing out fire from its nostrils, twining round the body of its enemy and driving its fangs deep into the flesh, had almost slain the lion, when Sir Yvain, moved by his knighthood to take the part of the weaker, ran up to its rescue. He held his shield before his face to keep off the monster's fiery breath. He raised his sword. For a moment the old might came back to his arm, and with one stroke he clave the dragon's body in two. The lion, thus set free, rose to its feet and shook its bloody mane, and roared so that all the forest echoed back the sound. Quickly Yvain stood upon his guard, for he thought he must now have to do with the other fierce beast. But the lion had no mind to assail its preserver. It crept up to him, crouching on the ground, falling upon him and licking his feet, and in all ways tried to let the knight know its gratitude. Yvain spoke kindly to the beast, and dressed its wounds as best as he could. Then, when he went on his way, the lion would not leave him, but followed or strode by his side. Soon it came to understand his commands, and obeyed his voice, like a dog. Never knight had such a faithful friend as this savage beast. At nightfall, when they halted, Yvain broke down boughs and made a rude lodge in which to pass the night. Meanwhile the lion went a little way off and killed a deer, the carcass of which he brought to its master, who with flint and steel lit a fire of moss and dry branches, and on a spit roasted the flesh for supper. But not a morsel would the lion touch till the knight had eaten, and when, after this simple meal, he lay down to sleep with his head upon his shield, the grateful beast prowled around and spent the night in watching over its preserver. Next morning Yvain rose betimes and set forward, knowing not nor heeding where he went, till at evening, as before, the lion brought him his prey, and they supped together and spent the night. Many days thus he journeyed on, with the lion by his side, through this great forest, and at last came upon a wide plain of rich meadows, in the midst of which stood a many-towered castle. Towards this the knight took his way, and reached the gate at sunset. Men came out and let down the drawbridge, but suddenly they fled at the sight of the strange squire Sir Yvain had with him. And the porter said, "Sir, it behoves thee to leave that beast without." "Nay," said Yvain, "my lion and I are not to be parted. We must either come in together, or else we'll go hence." The porter still grumbled, but thereon came the lord of the castle, who bade that Yvain and his lion should both be admitted, and he hastened to meet and welcome his guest. The knight was now courteously led into a chamber, where the ladies of the castle unarmed him, and brought him clothes of rich silk, and showed him all kindness. But to Sir Yvain it seemed that they were sad at heart, though they tried to look glad of his coming. When he came into the hall and supper was served, he still might see that some affliction had fallen upon all of the inhabitants of the castle. His host made a fair show for his sake, but he could not scarcely speak for sorrow, and the ladies would ever and again break out of weeping and sighing as they waited on him, and none ate a morsel from the plenteous board. The knight wondered greatly, and when supper was done, he asked the lord of the castle the cause of their trouble. "Sir, if it is your will, I will fain know why you make such ill cheer." "Alas," came the answer, "we would make joy as becomes us, since we have you as our guest. But we cannot but grieve when we think of what shall be done tomorrow. Know that in this country dwells a proud and cruel giant, by the name of Harpins of the Mountain, who is the terror of our lives, for no man here living can say him nay. And oh, sir, I have 4 goodly sons that he has taken prisoner, as they strove to rid the land of such a pest. 2 of them he has slain before my eyes. Each day must another be put to death unless I deliver him my daughter. Because she would not be his wife, he has sworn to marry her to the meanest of his servants. So morning by morning he comes before my castle demanding her, and I must see all my children undone, unless I can find a champion to fight this monster. What wonder then if we would be full of woe." "Methinks it strange," said Yvain, when he had listened to the tale, "that you have not ere this sought help and counsel from the king. For in all this wide world there is no man of such great might but King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table, who would be glad and willing to meet with such a man and try their strength against him. Sir, I have indeed sent to the king's court, but there are no knights there, save the best who can stand against this giant, and Sir Launcelot and all the best knights have gone to rescue the queen, who has been stolen away, they say, by a certain felon knight. Till they come back and bring their queen safe again, I can have no help." "Help you shall have," cried Yvain. "I know Sir Launcelot well, and for his sake and the maiden's, I will undertake this battle and fight with the giant. Let him come as soon as he will." "Heaven reward thee," prayed the knight, and the lady of the castle and her daughters came and knelt before Yvain, thanking him with tears and many kind words. But he declared that no lady should kneel to him, and raised them up, and spoke kindly to them, and bid them be of good cheer, for he would avenge them on their oppressor. Then they and all in the castle took courage, thinking that he must be a knight of strength and renown, who had a lion thus at his command, and so blithely promised to meet this fell giant. That night Sir Yvain slept once more upon a bed, and the lion laid beside, so that no man durst come near his chamber. In the morning he rose early, and before he did any other thing was gone to the chapel of the castle to hear mass. When a servant came running to say that the giant was at hand, all the castle hurried to the walls, and now Sir Yvain saw a piteous sight. With huge strides the giant came, a shaggy monster whose hair hung to his waist, dressed in bullskins, and bearing no weapon but a great club of iron. In his other hand he had a cruel scourge of 10 cords, with which he furiously beat his 2 captives, as he drove them before him almost naked, half-starved with cold and hunger, and having their hands bound behind their backs. And every blow the blood ran down their defenceless bodies, and their cries were heard throughout the castle, so that all rued the fate of these gentle youths, and their father and mother wept to behold them. Pale and trembling stood their sister, as the giant came beneath the walls, roaring out in the ears of all, "If thou wilt have thy sons alive, deliver me that damsel, that I may give her to the foulest knave that eats my bread." "Fear not," said Sir Yvain, as the weeping ladies did on his armour. "This giant is full fierce and cruel of his words, but either he shall kill me, or I will deliver this maiden from the dread of him. For certes, it were pity that such a foul hap should ever befall such a fair lady." "Oh, sir," said the father, "do as you say, and I will give you this castle and half my land." "Nay, heaven forbid that a true knight should take a reward for succouring a damsel," said Yvain, and bid them let down the drawbridge. Forth he rushed with his lion at his heels, while all the people in the castle fell on their knees and prayed for this gallant knight. When the giant saw him, he gave over lashing his captives, and turned upon this champion with mocking and boastful words. "What fiend makes thee so bold to come out against a man like me? Whoever sent thee here loved thee full little, and I shall soon be rid of thee." "Do thy best!" cried Sir Yvain, and without more ado hurled his spear so straight and strong that it pierced the bull-hide and sank deep into the giant's hairy breast. As the blood rushed out, the hideous monster gave a roar and brandished his iron club, rushing upon the knight as if he would crush him to the earth. But he deftly caught the blow upon his shield, and with his keen sword rained strokes upon the bull-hide that could not turn its edge. Cries of surprise, fear, and pity rose all around. Again and again the knight seemed to be already a dead man, but ever he escaped the iron club, and gave back blow for blow, till all wondered, and said that this could be no other than Sir Launcelot, or Sir Gawain, that fought thus against such a foe. But his strength began to fail him. He struck wildly in the air, he stumbled, his shield fell from his hands. The white maiden on the walls clasped her hands, and would have cried out, but she could not move her lips for terror. The giant gave a shout that went to every heart. He raised his club one moment more, and the knight was lost. Then suddenly the lion raised its head as it saw its master in such a strait. With a bound and a roar it sprang upon the giant, and tore his flesh so that the bone could be seen beneath. In vain he strove to use his club, the beast leapt aside from every stroke. Then before, behind, on either side, it flew upon him afresh, and mangled him till he bellowed in pain, and at last, blinded by the blood which flowed into his eyes, he overreached himself, falling on the ground like a heavy tree. By now Sir Yvain had taken breath. He ran up to the fallen monster, and with one mighty stroke cut off his right arm. Next moment he drove his good blade into the wicked heart. Trembling captives wept for joy. Their sister swooned away upon them all. The castle gates were flung open, and all within ran forth to hail the victor. Who can tell their gladness when they saw that cruel oppressor lie lifeless on the ground? The lord and lady of the castle fell on the neck of their champion, and prayed him earnestly to stay with them, and take all they had for his. "Nay," said Sir Yvain, "I will have naught of ye, but it were a horse on which to go my way, as becomes a knight." "Sir," said his host, "the best steed in my stalls is yours freely, but I would give you back what is dearest of all to me, my daughter, that you have given to me this day. Well are ye worthy to wed her, and she is not to be despised by any in the land." "Take it for no despite, if I may not wed her or any other maiden," answered Yvain. "She is indeed fair and gentle, and in all the world there is no king or emperor or man of so great honour that he might not gladly have so sweet a lady for his wife. But I have a wife, and alas, I have none. Courteous sir, entreat me no further, but let me go hence. And if any ask us what knight has done so doughty a deed, how shall we name thee?" "Call me the Knight of the Lion," said Yvain, and would tell them no more. Long they pressed him to stay with them, but when they saw that his will might not be moved, they said farewell, and sent him forth upon a gallant steed, fit for such a knight. Sir Yvain gave his horse the rein, and rode on wherever it bore him, with the faithful lion at his side. Well pleased was he, to be sure, that his sword had not forgotten its ancient sharpness, yet grief ever seized him as he thought of the lady to whom it should have been devoted. Was she dead? Was she married again? Believing him dead, he cared not to know, since she loved him no more. He could do nothing for her but obey her request, never to seek to see her face or let her hear his name. Chapter 4. Before many months had passed, the land began to ring with the fame of this fearless champion, who was known only as the Knight of the Lion. Foul caitiff and fell tyrant shook at that name, for well they knew that the oppressed and the helpless had no surer friend. All who were in misfortune had but to repair to him, and might then bless the day on which he was born, for they were no more ready to beseech than he was to succour, and he fought for no cause in which he did not conquer. Wherever he went, the people came forth from the towns to greet him, and when he departed, conveyed him out the gates with prayers that no harm might befall so gallant a champion. These prayers were as a magic armour, against which the strongest weapons could not prevail, and for years This knight passed through all the perils unhurt, achieving adventures in which all others had fallen. Never have men seen such a knight since the brave Sir Yvain was alive, said King Arthur among his knights at Camelot, as the news came thither of fresh exploits done by the stranger. Methinks he were well worthy to sit at our round table. Is there none of my knights who will go forth and find him, bring him hither by force or by his own good will? The king's knights were nonwise loath to do his will, for they envied the fame of the Knight of the Lion, and jealously desired to try their might against him. Sir Launcelot, Sir Gawain, and Sir Kay the boaster sought the quest, and Arthur sent forth all three, bidding them not return without the unknown knight, as a courteous friend or a vanquished foe. So these three took divers ways, and rode far and wide, asking all they met for news of a knight who led a lion with him wherever he went. All had heard of this knight, all bore witness that he had helped in word and deed whoever had need of him, but no man could say where he might be found. The three knights rode on by hill and dale, by castle and town, but still could hear no tidings of the Knight of the Lion. Yet Sir Launcelot and Gawain ceased not to seek him. Only Sir Kay left the quest, and rode back to tell the king that this knight must be dead or held fast in some dungeon. But now as he rode, it chanced he met with him, and perceived by the lion that this was the knight he sought. Because his visor was down, he knew not it was Sir Yvain, but Yvain knew him well for Sir Kay, the steward of the king, who had ever railed and boasted himself, but whose words were greater than his deeds.
"Hold, Sir Knight of the Lion," he cried loudly. "I have sworn to bring thee to King Arthur as friend or foe."
"Sir Steward," answered Yvain sadly, "I have no friends, and am foe to no good man. Have it as thou wilt."
"Then sit firmly in thy saddle," said the boaster. "But first send thy lion away, or bind him, if thou wilt not yield thee. Thyself shall fight with me alone."
"Let the lion not make thee aghast. It is neither right nor custom to have aid against a single knight." And with that Sir Yvain bade his lion lie down, and the faithful beast obeyed him, nor would it ever move till it saw its master in danger. Scant courtesy passed between the two. Without more ado they ran together with their sharp lances, and at first onset Sir Yvain hurled Sir Kay out of his saddle, and cast him on the ground a spear's length behind his horse, and with such force that his helm smote a foot deep into the ground. No other harm would he do him, because he knew him of old, but he left the steward discomfited on the ground, and thus took farewell of him. "Go back to the king, and tell him that the Knight of the Lion is not worthy to be his friend, and that knights such as thou are unworthy to be my foes." He turned his rein and rode away with a heavy heart, leading beside him the horse of the fallen knight. It was not in him to be proud of such a victory, and the sight of Sir Kay had set him thinking of the days gone by, when he fought and feasted among the princes of Arthur's court, and knew not of the sorrow that should come upon him, when all his life was full of pride and joy. Now his only hope was in death, and death came not to him, who was sick of life. At times it seemed his madness was about to return upon him. The best he could look for would be to die like a wild beast, unknown and unpitied, bereft of himself as he had been of his wife and his friends. Then the lion came and licked his hand, and with tears in his eyes he raised his head. And lo, now, as he looked around, he knew well the place in which he was. There was a great leafless thorn tree above a trickling well, and hard by a little chapel built upon a rock. It was under this thorn that he first met his lady many years ago. It was in this chapel that they had pledged their troth. At sight, that dauntless knight grew white and trembled like a woman. Overcome with sudden weakness, fell from his horse. He rose to his feet, and wild thoughts rushed into his mind. In the fall his sword had escaped from its sheath. He seized it and thrust the hilt into the ground. He placed the point against his throat. He would have slain himself on the spot, when a voice of distress reached his ear. In the chapel there was one weeping and complaining. Sir Yvain paused to ask, "Who art thou that moanest there?" "I? Well away," answered the voice. "I am the sorriest wight that ever lived, and as yet I have lived but 7 years." "Nay," said the knight, "by all the saints there is no sorrow like mine, for 7 years past, nor any alive that might take such dole. I was a man, and now am none. nor worthy to be seen of men. Once I was a noble knight and lord of might and renown. I had knights and squires in my train, and riches and lands in plenty, and all I lost through my folly. But the greatest sorrow is yet to tell. I lost my lady, that was full dear to me, and that loved me better than her life. I have naught to do but slay myself, by whom I was undone. Alas! Mine is a more sorrowful case. I am but a little maiden, 7 years old. My father, they say, died before I was born. I left my mother in grief and fear. Many strong lords have sought to wed her, yet, though she lived alone with no one to protect her, she ever sent them away, and wept for her own good knight, who is dead these 7 years. Ah, sir, there is a felon knight called Sir Saldos, who dwells near at hand, and of whom all this country is in dread. He has sore vexed my mother, and has robbed her of all her lands, when she would not give them with her good will. And to-day this wicked knight came at the hour of prime, and has taken her captive in her own castle, and there she will not marry him. She must starve in a dungeon, if I bring not some champion to her succour. Fain am I to seek the Knight of the Lions, who, as men say, slew the giant Happins, and never fails ladies that are in need. For certain he would fight this cruel man, but none know where he might be found, and I am weak and tender of age, and alas, alas, my mother must die. Nay, dear maiden, she shall not die while I live, cried Yvain, forgetting his own grief at this pitiful tale. Thank heaven that has brought to thee him thou'st seek. I am he whom men call Knight of the Lion, and I will fight this felon while breath is in me. Come forth and lead me to where he is, and be of good cheer. Forth ran the little maiden with a cry of joy, but on the threshold of the chapel she paused, and shook with fear, and pointed with her hands. Ah, see, there he comes, riding on a black horse, and here in this meadow he is wont to defy all that fear, not to try his might. Sir Yvain looked and saw, riding furiously towards him on a coal-black steed, a tall knight in black armour from head to foot, with a black shield and a black pennon on his lance, and the trappings of his horse were of black velvet. "'Tis well," he said, placing the child upon Sir Kay's horse, and bade her not be afraid of the lion, for it would do no maiden harm, and bade it watch by her while he dealt with the Black Knight. Then he drew tight his girths, took his shield in hand, leapt into the saddle, and drew forth like an arrow, crying, "Ho! Sir Salados, false knight and robber of ladies, the time is come when thou shalt be well paid for all thy villainy." But the Black Knight spoke not a word, but, with a scornful laugh, put his lance in rest, and spurred upon Yvain. And now, as they rushed together, a loud peal of thunder burst above their heads, and a heavy storm of rain and hail poured down upon them, so that the knights were almost hid from sight. With a mighty shock they met midway, both lances splintering to the handle, but neither was shaken in his seat. Out flashed their bright swords, and deadly were their strokes dealt between them. It was no Sir Kay with whom the Knight of the Lion had now to do. Sparks flew from helmet and hauberk. The armour crashed and gasped beneath the blows. The blood poured down upon the field. Still each sat stiffly upon his horse, and neither would yield a foot. It was a battle for life and death. At last the Black Knight's stroke seemed to wax faint, but Sir Yvain gathered all his strength, and smote a blow which cleft helm and brain-pan, and made Sir Salados reel and give back, as if he would have fallen. For a moment Sir Yvain held his hand, deeming that his foe would beg for mercy. Then, of a sudden, the Black Knight turned and fled for his life. With all his mane he sped away, and the Knight of the Lion rode hard behind him, sword in hand. Like the wind they rode, for now the beaten knight could see his castle walls, and Yvain would kill his horse, but he would take him, dead or alive. The storm raged around them, and the hail blinded their eyes, but with loosened bridle and blood-stained spurs they urged their panting steeds swiftly near the castle gates. And now the flying men gained the moat. 3 strides, and he crossed the drawbridge. He is hidden within the walls. Fast following Yvain, heedless of a wary cry, his good steed bounded forward, and already he is within the gateway, when, with a clang, the portcullis fell from above, smiting through saddle and horse, shearing the spurs from the heels of the knight, and, by a hair's breadth, leaving him unhurt. But amazed, dismounted and alone in the house of his enemy, which was no other than the house that had once been his. In all haste he gained his feet and stood on guard, with his back to the gate, but the sword he had almost dropped from his hand when he saw no one in the courtyard, save a lady weeping and wringing her hands. That lady was his wife, who 7 long years had bid him see her no more. "Alas, alas!" she cried, "what do you here? This is a den of robbers and murderers, into which you have come, and I am an unhappy lady who must here lose my life. Then I shall lose my own first, for my life is not so dear to me as thine." The voice went to her heart, and she looked earnestly upon the closed visor of the knight, and was about to speak, when Sir Salardos, all covered with blood and brandishing a huge axe, burst forth through a door in the walls, and a band of armed men at his heels. Now Sir Yvain was lost, unless some enchanter could come to his aid, or might have wings to fly. Yet the good knight did not quail. He drew the lady to him, and stood before her with his drawn sword, as on rushed the Black Knight and his treacherous rabble. But ere the sharp steel clashed, a sound was heard that made them take hold, and look around in dread. It was the roar of the lion that now came raging without the gate, and when it saw its master's peril, dashed against the steel bars, tore up the earth beneath, and with all its might strove to win to his side. Small wonder that these caitiffs shook at the sight, and drew back a space. "Would ye fear a caged beast?" cried their felon lord, and led them once more against Sir Yvain. Alas, what could his single arm do against so many? They fell upon him, the lady shrieked and fell, his sword gleamed like light, and it was wondrous to see how he stood firm against such mighty blows. Then, as they bore him down, the Black Knight's axe was raised above his head. The crowd gave a cry, and a crash was heard above the din, for the lion had burst through the bars to spring among them, with a bristling mane and open jaws. The heavy blow fell upon its head, but never struck Sir Salardos another blow. Hurled to the ground he lay with his neck broken, and his craven crew turned and fled on every side, melted like snow before the hot breath of the lion, which chased them fiercely into the inner courts of the castle. Chapter 5. Breathless but unwounded, Sir Yvain sprang to his feet and looked around. He was alone with the lady, who knelt before him and thanked him fully humbly. He would have spoken, but his tongue clove to his mouth. Then he heard the tramping of hoofs without, and 2 knights rode up, and the little maiden by their side on Sir Kay's horse. Yvain made clear the entry to let them pass, and forthwith he knew them for Sir Launcelot and Sir Gawain. Much they marvelled to see him safe from such a fray, and fain were they, when the lady had told the tale, to learn the name of her deliverer. "Surely," said Sir Launcelot, "there is no knight save him of the Lion who could thus succour a lady, and this knight we have sought these many days." "Ah me!" cried the lady, "there was once such a knight who took me for his wife. By my own sinful pride I drove him from me, or else I had never wanted succour against robbers and traitors. But all that I have and hope would I give him to see him again for a moment's space, that I might pray him to pardon me and die in peace." "Fair lady," said Gawain the courteous, "that may not be. Thou wert wedded to our fellow Sir Yvain, and he is dead these 7 years. Would indeed that he were still alive." "He is alive," spoke a voice that they all knew well of old. "Sirs, I am him you seek. Lady, I am him you loved." He raised his visor, and amazed they saw Yvain stand before them. The 2 knights made the sign of the cross. The lady gave a cry. "O my wife, it is your forgiveness that I should pray for on my knees." He could speak no more, and she could not hear for joy. Each of them would fain be the first to forgive. They fell upon each other's necks, and in one kiss forgot all the sorrows of those 7 years. Thank you for listening to What the Folk. This has been The Night of the Lions by Chretien De Troyes. Thank you.